Thank you for being here. I'm really excited about today's theme. We're going to be talking about the truth about education. We'll be starting off with Mr. Jim Dang. He'll be talking about a lecture for teachers, I Can Be Less Boring. We'll be followed up by student Francine Chang from the junior class. She's going to be talking about achieving arete, how do good students get to be good, and how do not so good students learn to become good. And we'll be closing out with Mr. Bingham, who's going to be talking about curriculum is irrelevant. And then for the first time in the Apollo lectures, we're going to turn off the camera, and we're going to open it up to open mic. So what we're going to do for the open mic section, just to let you guys know, I'm going to pull up the three speakers, and if anybody has a specific question for any of the three speakers, we'll start with kind of just a dialogue, and then I'll have the three speakers sit down, and anybody else who wants to hop up and share their thoughts about the truth about education, we'll do that, okay? So, Mr. Jim Dang, everybody.
Hi, for those who don't know me, I teach math. First semester I taught Algebra 2, and then Algebra 3, and then switching my schedule. So now I teach pre-calculus, and I think a lot of you guys have me before. So, welcome. I'm glad everybody is here to be able to make it. Kind of want to bring some things in here for a second. First off, I'm kind of a person that just goes and just wings into the moment, so just bear with me. And if I ramble a little bit, just feel free to slap me once in a while. That'll be fine. I give you that permission, by the way. I got 5 bullet points here before I start, and this is, I guess, more towards teachers, but obviously if you are a student who's thinking about wanting to become in the teaching field, this is something that you could always incorporate too. So first off, I want to go ahead and bring up my upbringing. Where I want to start off with is I want to let you know that I was born in 1980, and starting from all there, I want you to understand my dad was an immigrant from Vietnam, and my mom was actually an immigrant from Laos, a country that's next to Vietnam. And I remember the stories where my mom would tell me when she was with my grandmother and their 9 sisters and brothers. And what happened was in Laos, they had their government was being taken over by communists, and it happened at the same time around my dad as well. So they ended up fleeing. My mom told me a story where they would walk for I think like 10-20 miles outside of Laos just to escape the communism because they were taking over the land or whatnot. My dad didn't even and this is funny because when I visited Vietnam, he told me this story. My dad didn't even tell my grandmother that he was leaving. So it was kind of a spur-of-the-moment thing. He joined the Naval Academy in Vietnam and ended up leaving that part of the area as well. So what happened afterwards was that they both were able to flee their own country. And of all places, they met up in Iowa. And that's where they got married and they have me and then whatever. Now you have to understand, growing up, I grew up pretty poor. I couldn't understand it, but when I was about 6 or 7, my mom would pay food through paper. And I couldn't understand the reasoning behind that because I noticed when I was in school, people had dollar bills. And I finally realized what we were on was we were on welfare. I had no idea. And I kind of realized growing up, as opposed to now, you take things for granted. And you take things in reality, you take a lot of things that it's given to you that you just don't think secondhand about. And growing up, I always understood, why are my friends able to do this, this, and this? And here I am at home, just basically eating whatever, for the next day. And barely making through scraps. So growing up, I grew up pretty poor. And lucky for me that I was able to get myself an education, and here I go with it. Why am I sharing you this story here? Well, to be honest with you, I feel like as I go through this and I go through my lecture here, I want you to understand I'm also a human being. I've also got through a lot of tribulations. I've got through a lot of problems, but at the same sense, though, my story is probably not much different from yours in that retrospect. And I want you to understand, just because I'm up here today does not mean I'm better than you. Just because I'm here today does not mean I've got, I've accomplished a lot more than you. I'm just here today because of what I've learned before and how I become today. Okay? So, I wanted to share a little bit about myself and how I got to education was essentially this. I was at a dead end. I graduated from UT, and I was at this job. I was at this job that dealt with a lot of the accounting, and I realized I hated that job. Really just hated that job. I hated the industry. I hated the fact that everything was going over segment over numbers. Hated it. So my friend told me, hey, why don't you come to this information session about teaching? And I was like, well, I had nothing else to do. Happy hour was about a little bit later, but it was okay. Okay, I went ahead and went to this information meeting, and I find out a little bit later that we both sign up. She ended up dropping off the program. I didn't. So in retrospect, I got to teaching totally by accident. And then 8 years later, I'm still here. They haven't kicked me out yet. Why am I sharing you all my stories about this? Essentially, I want you to understand how I like to present myself, and when I teach, I like to use real-life examples. And I always like to, and you're going to find out later, I always want to know what the students are. Yes, I have 180 of them. Sometimes I want to kill about 80 of them, you know what I'm saying? You don't have your test in time. Why don't you have your homework? But I can tell you this, I pretty much know something that's going on to that person. And I can pretty much tell you, hey, you're going on the track team, how you doing, how's your little sister going, so on and so forth. And I can tell you that right now. But in order to do all of that, first off, I always present my lesson. And when I do this is how I feel sometimes about teaching. Ever seen this poster? I kind of stole it, and I saw this out through the workroom in the White House.
I printed it off Jill Davison's Facebook page.
And I was actually looking at Jill Davison's Facebook page the other day trying to figure this out. Teaching's a hard job. Anybody can tell you that. Oh, okay. You're done from 7 to 2:30, and that's it. That's what the community thinks a lot of times, and this is what we do. That last picture is really like me, too, by the way, when I had stacks and stacks of papers. Okay. So when I plan a lesson, when it comes time for me to teach 30 bright kids who are wanting to learn, I always follow this type of concept here. First off, I got to know the content. Okay? I don't always necessarily feel like I need to be Albert Einstein. Okay? But I feel like if I'm presenting a content, I better know it. But when I introduce it, I like to add a little humor to it as well. And knowing the content is making sure that I know ins and outs and I can predict what the student is asking. Okay? There's a lot of times to be less boring. A lot of times you just have to be straightforward. This is one of those times. If I'm introducing something, let's just say in math, if I'm teaching something like matrices, okay, I better do the homework before my students do. Because if I do the homework with the students do, I can predict those questions before they go. So I make sure I know that content real well. Now, do I expect to be in front of doing my homework at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning? Tell you the truth, I know most people say no. I do it. Only because I kind of put myself on my second part of this there. I put myself in those shoes. So when I introduce a lesson, and I make sure everybody's engaged, people ask me questions. A lot of times I try to keep it on straightforward, content-based. But one of my rules when I introduce something is that I always encourage students to ask questions. But when there's sometimes a question I have no idea how to answer, and sometimes you might have a bright student who asks me this off-the-wall question, I'm not going to be afraid to say I don't know. But one thing I always tell my student is this: I may not know, but I'm going to try to find the answer for you. And many times, if you guys ever ask me this, the next day I'll come up with the answer. Hey, do you remember the question you asked me before? Here's the answer. and they look at you differently when you do it that way. It happens a lot of times, especially in my 6th period class. And I have this bright student named Kevin, and he will challenge me. But that's okay, I want that challenge. Okay? But another thing that you need to understand when you present a lesson, make sure you have confidence in yourself. Because I can tell you this, right now, you could probably stand right there and tell me, oh, he's probably shaking his boots right now. Or his tone is very confident that you know he knows what he's talking about. Because if you can express yourself as being confident, I think the kids will know too. The students will too. Okay? So I put myself, when I teach something, I put myself put the student in the teacher's shoes. What do they want to learn? Okay? Sometimes I feel this way. And I say, put the student in the teacher's shoes. Well, what do they want to learn? What's the relevance of this lecture? Well, how am I going to use this in real life? I'll be honest with you, I do the best I can, but sometimes I just say, when am I going to use this in real life? I'm like, I really don't know. But you'll use it right now because I'm telling you this information, right? So when you present a lesson, this is another way to do this. So a lot of times people forget about this. You put the teacher in this. In this case, they put the teacher in the student's shoes. That's a copy and paste error right there. So you put the teacher in the student's shoes. And if I was able to evaluate myself, I can. I wouldn't mind having a video camera on me because, when I look back at it, I want to say, what am I doing wrong? Or what can I do to further my lesson skills? So, as I present myself into their shoes, that's fine. But my biggest thing, to tell you the truth, is my thing when I teach this class, or any class that's given to me, I always want to build rapport.